Talking about going crazy.
Talking about altering your perception of reality.
And we remembered what we talked about last week when we were talking about mind control. I couldn't find anything cool with corn, to be honest. Any folklore with corn.
I really
Maybe one day we should probably watch Children of the Corn, and we could talk about that.
Yeah. One day my corn vid will appear.
Yeah, maybe.
Like delicious, sweet corn.
Anyways, here's second best. The CIA's appalling human experiments with mind control from History.com by Brianna Nofil.
Yes.
Not to be confused with No Frills.
No fill.
On April 10th, 1953, Allen Dulles, the newly appointed director of the CIA, delivered a speech to a gathering of Princeton alumni. Though the event was mundane, global tensions were running high. The Korean War was coming to an end, and earlier that week, the New York Times had published a startling story asserting that Americans POWs returning from the country that they have converted by communist brainwashers.
Oh no.
Some GIs were confessing to war crimes, like carrying out germ warfare against the communists, a charge the U.S. categorically denied. Others were reportedly so brainwashed that they had refused to return to the United States at all. As if that weren't enough, the U.S. was weeks away from secretly sponsoring the overthrow of a democratically elected leader in Iran. Dulles had become the first civilian director of an agency growing more powerful by the day, and his speech provided an early glimpse into his priorities at the CIA. In the past few years, we have become accustomed to hearing much about the battle for men's minds, the war of ideologies. He told the attendees, "I wonder, however, whether the clearly pervasive and magnitude of the problem, whether we realized how sinister the battle for men's minds has become in the Soviet hands." He continued, "We might call it, in this new form, a brain warfare." Dulles proceeded to describe the Soviet brain perversion techniques as effective but abhorrent and nefarious. He gestured to the American POWs returning from Korea, shells of the men they once were, parroting the communist propaganda they had heard cycled for weeks on end. He expressed fears and uncertainty. Were they using chemical agents, hypnosis, something else entirely? We in the West, the CIA director conceded, are somewhat handicapped in brain warfare. This sort of non-consensual experimentation, even on one's enemies, was unethical to American values. Dulles insisted, as well as unethical to what should be human values. That is pretty crazy, man. I can imagine, that wartime when basically there was no rules. They basically set up wartime rules after that because there were so many atrocities that happened.
I can't wait for Call of Duty's newest puzzle game, Call of Duty Brain Warfare.
That's right. Yeah, you just basically try to come up with the best propaganda you can. It's like, the color red is bad, the color blue is the best color, and if you like the color red, we're throwing you in prison until you like the color blue.
They look at the American flag. It's
It's like, I don't know which one's better.
I like it, but I hate it.
It's a combination of the two.
Show them purple and they just explode.
Yeah, it's like a gray area.
Fear of brainwashing and a new breed of brain warfare terrified and fascinated the American public throughout the 1950s. Spurred by both the words of the CIA and the stories of brainwashed GIs returning from China, Korea, and the Soviet Union, newspaper headlines like "New Evil Seen in Brainwashing" and "Brainwashing versus Western Psychiatry" offered sensational accounts of new mind control techniques and technologies no man could fully resist. The paranoia began to drift into American culture, with books like The Manchurian Candidate and The Naked Lunch, playing on themes of unhinged scientists and vast political conspiracies. The idea of brainwashing also provided many Americans with a compelling, almost comforting explanation for communism's swift rise, that Soviets used the tools of brainwashing not just on enemy combatants, but on their own people. Why else would so many countries be embracing such an obviously backward ideology? American freedom in the mind versus Soviet mind control became a dividing line as stark as the Iron Curtain.
So basically, they were like, well, if they could do it, we could do it too.
It's funny because I think the supposed brainwashing of communism is pretty much the same as the American patriotism. It's just their own country's patriotism.
What's any, really?
It's any
It's like, and it's also like
Political
the way
view.
history is written. History is written by the victors. So a lot of times whoever was the enemy or the bad guys, quote unquote, are made to seem more bad by the victors.
Yeah.
Just because they usually aren't around to
except for Hitler.
say.
Everything but Hitler.
The thing is Stalin was worse, but for some reason Hitler is known as the ultimate bad guy. I'm not saying either one are good, but I'm saying like for some reason Hitler is put on a higher pedestal than Stalin was.
I guess he
even though Stalin killed I think 3 times more.
Yikes.
Yeah.
No, that's a fun factoid.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. MK Ultra. 3 days after his speech decrying Soviet tactics, Dulles approved of the beginning of MK Ultra, a top-secret CIA program for covert use of biological and chemical materials. American values made for good rhetoric, but Dulles had far grander plans for the agency's Cold War agenda. MK Ultra's mind control experiments generally centered around the behavior modification via electroshock therapy, hypnosis, polygraphs, radiation, a variety of drugs, toxins, and chemicals. These experiments relied on a range of test subjects, some who freely volunteered, some who volunteered under coercion, and some who had absolutely no idea they were involved in a sweeping defense research program. From mentally impaired boys at a state school to American soldiers to sexual psychopaths. At a state hospital, MK Ultra's programs were preyed on the most vulnerable members of society. The CIA's considered prisoners especially good subjects, as they were willing to give consent in exchange for extra recreation time or commuted sentences. Whitley Bulger, a former organized crime boss, wrote of his experience as an inmate test subject in MK Ultra. 8 convicts in a panic and paranoid state, Bulger said of the 1957 tests in Atlanta penitentiary, where he was serving time. Total loss of appetite, hallucinating. The room would change shape. Hours of paranoia and the feeling violent. We experienced horrible periods of living nightmares and even blood coming out of the walls. Guys turning into skeletons in front of me. I saw a camera change into the head of a dog. I felt like I was going insane. I think they were on acid.
Psychedelic drugs.
Yeah, acid or mushrooms are probably both.
Alcatraz.
Oh my god, that's where they sent the terrors.
That is Whitney Bulger, 1959 mugshot.
Wow. Yeah, he looks like he's going insane.
Walls are bleeding.
He's got like a Vegeta hairline. Look at that.
It just needs to be taller in the middle.
Yeah,
that's Vegeta hair.
He's gotta get spiked up.
Bulger claimed that he had been injected with LSD, lethargic acid dithylamide, or acid, had become one of the CIA's key interests for its brain warfare program. As the agency theorized, it could be useful in interrogations. In the late 1940s, the CIA received reports that the Soviet Union had engaged in intensive efforts to produce LSD, and that the Soviets had attempted to purchase the world's supply of the chemical. One CIA officer described the agency as literally terrified of the Soviets' LSD program, largely because of the lack of knowledge about the drug in the United States. This was the one material that we had ever been able to locate that really had potential fantastic possibilities if used wrongly. Wait, fantastic if used wrongly? That's not right. The officer testified. With the advent of MK Ultra in HD, the government's interest in LSD shifted from a defensive to an offensive orientation. Agency officials noted that LSD could be potentially useful in gaining control of bodies, whether they were willing or not. The CIA envisioned applications that ranged from removing people from Europe in the case of Soviet attack to enabling assassinations of enemy leaders. On November 18, 1953, a group of 10 scientists met at a cabin located deep in the forests of Maryland. A cabin in the woods, you could say. After extended discussions, the participants agreed that to truly understand the value of the drug, An unwitting experiment would be desirable. That part was a quote.
Wow.
Is that the boy?
The CIA.
Wait.
Oh, wow.
I'm just...
Dr. Harry Williams and Carl Pettifer are conducting an LSD. So he's basically giving him a drug.
If we want to understand it, I think we should all do the LSD, guys.
Yeah.
Good idea, Dr. Cormick.
Well, they didn't really know too much about these back then, so. The CIA remained keenly aware of how the public would react to any discovery of MK Ultra, and if they believe these programs to be essential to national security, they must remain a tightly guarded secret. How would the CIA possibly explain dosing unassuming Americans with LSD? Precautions must be taken not only to protect operations from exposure to the enemy forces, but also to conceal these activities from the American public in general, wrote the CIA's Inspector General in 1957. The knowledge that the agency is engaging in unethical and illicit activities would have serious repercussions in political and diplomatic circles and would be detrimental to accomplish this mission.
It's almost like we're doing something wrong.
Yeah. Well, you know what it was. They didn't talk about this. They didn't actually say that it was true until way later because everybody involved was already retired and had all their money. So they didn't care if it was talked about or not. Mm-hmm. They just didn't want to risk their jobs and their money and the power that they had. True. Operation Midnight Climax.
Oh, Midnight Climax.
The CIA's...
Wait, you read this one. I didn't get this one.
The CIA's initial experiments with LSD were fairly simple. If shockingly unethical, the agency generally dosed single targets, finding volunteers when they could, sometimes slipping the drug into the drinks of fellow CIA employees over time.
This'll be
These
good.
LSD experiments grew increasingly elaborate. Perhaps the most notorious of these projects was Operation Midnight Climax.
Midnight Climax! A view of the old CIA building. Okay.
Oh my.
In 1955, on 225 Chestnut Street, San Francisco, the CIA was devoting substantial attention to decorating a bedroom. What? George White oversaw the interior renovations. Not much of a decorator, White had a storied career in the Federal Bureau of Narcotics. When the CIA moved into drug experiments, bringing White on board became top priority. White hung up pictures of French can-can dances and flowers. He draped lush red bedroom curtains over the windows. He framed a series of Toulouse Lautrec posters with black silk mats. For a middle-aged drug bureaucrat, each item evoked sex and glamour. George White wasn't building a normal bedroom. He was building a trap. White then hired Berkeley, engineering student to install bugging equipment and a two-way mirror. White sat behind the mirror, martini in hand, and waited for the action to begin. Prostitutes would lure unsuspecting Johns to the bedroom. See, now I thought Midnight Climax was just like I just had it in my head. But no, it really was Midnight Climax.
It's
exactly what you think.
They made it literally what was it about.
John's bedroom, where the men would be dosed with LSD and their actions observed by White from beyond the mirror, with a martini in hand. As payment for their services, the sex workers received small amounts of cash, as well as a guarantee from White that he'd intercede when the woman inevitably had run-ins with law enforcement in the future. Sounds super illegal in all cases.
That sounds very suspect. So I'm wondering if they just drugged them up and then just left them in the room to see what the guys would do, or if they actually did commit acts and they were just trying to see like how they would affect them and the acts they were committing.
Yeah, they just wanted to see how they acted on the effects of LSD.
Yeah.
And they thought they were having just a good time.
So they were trying to do it with people that were... So these people were drugged, like, without really knowing, and, like, probably not even knowing what LSD was. That's pretty crazy.
Mm-hmm. It's like, hey, take this pill. It's like, okay, I will do that.
Okay, then. Though the CIA piloted these safe houses as a stage for testing the effects of LSD, White's interest shifted to another element of his observations. The sex.
Of course.
The San Francisco house became the center for what one writer called the CIA carnal operations, as officials began asking new questions about how to work with prostitutes, how they could be trained, and how they could handle state secrets. The agency also analyzed when, in the course of sexual encounter, information could best be extracted from a source, eventually concluding that it was immediately after sex. But perhaps, unsurprisingly, much of White's actions were driven by pure voyeurism. I toiled wholeheartedly in the vineyards because it was fun, White later said.
Fun.
Where else could a red-blooded American boy lie? Kill, cheat, steal, rape, and pillage with the sanction of a blessing from the All-Highest. Wow, he was on a power trip.
Yikes.
The demise of MK Ultra. The CIA's experiments with LSD persisted until 1963, before coming to a fairly anticlimactic end. In the spring of 1963, John Vance, a member of the CIA Inspector General staff, learned about the project's surreptitious.
It's a big
surreptitious. Surreptitious admission to unwitting, involuntary human subjects. Though MK Ultra directors tried to convince the CIA's Independent Audit Board that the research should continue, the Inspector General insisted that the agency follow new research ethics guidelines and bring all programs on non-consenting volunteers to an end.
In 1977, Senator Edward Kennedy oversaw congressional hearings investigating the effects of MK Ultra. Congress brought in a roster of ex-CIA employees for questioning and interrogating them about who oversaw these programs, how participants were identified, and if any of these programs had been continued. The hearings turned over a number of disturbing details, particularly about the 1953 suicide of Dr. Frank Olson, an Army scientist who jumped out of a hotel window several days after unwittingly consuming a drink spiked with LSD. Love some donuts.
Nice.
Amid growing criminalization of drug users, and just a few years after President Nixon's declared drug abuse as public enemy number one. The ironies of the U.S. troubling experimentation with drugs appeared in sharp relief. But throughout the hearings, Congress kept hitting roadblocks. CIA staffers claimed that they couldn't remember details about how many human experimentation projects, or even the number of people involved. The obvious next step would be to consult the records, but that presented a small problem. In 1973, amid mounting inquiries, the director of MKUltra told workers,
"It would be a good idea if the MKUltra files were destroyed." He smiles smugly, looks up to the corner and shrugs.
Citing vague concerns about the privacy and embarrassment of participants. The men who crafted MKUltra effectively eradicated the paper record for one of the United States' most obviously illegal undertakings. A program born in secrecy would hold on to many of its secrets forever.
That's amazing.
No one says that.
That's pretty cool. That's pretty crazy.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy.
Man, and a lot of people are like, man,
crazy.
you know, conspiracies never happened. The U.S. government would never do, like, experiments like this. And here we go. Here it is. This is why so many people are so distrustful of government.
There's so many conspiracy theories, but I think all the biggest real-life conspiracies people don't talk about because they hide it so well.
Well, the crazy, like, fantasy conspiracies are, like, just like, oh, man, you know, like, government's been in touch with aliens forever, man.
The biggest conspiracies that are there because they're really hard to disprove, and they somewhat align with some facts.
Yeah,
but
I
there's
think
no proof either.
there's like a small tinge of truth by each conspiracy, but I think what it is it's like, a game of telephone, or be like you go to somebody, be like, hey man, I seen George was like dragging a bag out back and digging a hole, and then the next person's like, dude, George was killed somebody and he buried him in the backyard, and somebody else is like, dude, like George has been killing people for years and burying them in the backyard.
He said that like 15 times already, buried a hole in the backyard.
Yes.
Dude, and the other day he was at the grocery store where other people were.
It's
You
like,
think
oh
he
my
killed
god,
someone in the
and
grocery
I
store?
bet everybody there also does the same thing. There's like a whole group of people.
He knows the store manager, dude. They're in it together.
Yeah, so I think that's,
And Stacy, I hear she moved town.
yeah.
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 No, she's in his backyard.
Yeah, man, she's in witness protection now, because what she's seen some stuff, man.
A good conspiracy is like you've seen like a fancy jigsaw puzzle piece, and then you put it away, and then you have another really nice jigsaw puzzle piece that from memory looks like it would fit, but when you put them together they don't quite align right. Like you could shove it in there and like force it in, but it's not quite the right piece.
Yeah.
That's what a conspiracy theory is like.
So my favorite part was where the guy was just like, hey, I got all this money and power, I'm just gonna set up this room and watch like people do it while they're on drugs, and I'm just gonna have some alcohol.
Can't they just they have do drugs? Like, no,
They have to have sex. Listen to me, they have to have sex.
Yeah.
And why are you drinking the job?
I need my martini for this steakhouse.
Yeah, it specifically highlighted the martini. That's crazy. Speaking of crazy, what do you want to cover next time there, Goose?
Well, I guess not corn, because we can't
Yeah,
find
sadly. Maybe we can watch Children of the Corn.
Okay, name a color.
Yellow.
Okay, we're gonna look up
SpongeBob SquarePants conspiracy theories.
who really is SpongeBob. What does he want from humanity? What is his goals?
Yeah, are they
Well, maybe
actually
not SpongeBob.
irradiated creatures living under the sea?
I'm trying to think of literally anything else that's yellow.
The sun.
Dude, does the sun really?
The sun
have it
is
out
just
for
a
all of
hologram,
mankind?
man. The sun's just a hologram. It's not even real, bro.
There we go. Let's look up fake hologram sun theory. I'm sure that exists, right?
Sounds good to me.
Absurd. Let's just look up like top 10 most absurd conspiracies, something like that.
That's even better.
That sounds fun.
Next time
I like that.
on the Folklore Scrolls, top 10 conspiracies. If I can find it, and if I
we
remember.
find it the morning of.
Yeah. No, we definitely do research like all week.
Like
Yeah, shh, be quiet, man.
I do. I have like a month of pre-planning for each video, like beforehand,
Definitely.
which means I have to like research 4 different videos up like a month each before, overlapping each other.
Yeah.
And I definitely don't Google search it.
Nope. Anyways, holla at you later.
Bye.